Welcome to So Amazing Beginner 2, class number 6. Now that you have finished your pajama pants in the last class, I want to say congratulations. You are so amazing. So today we will be doing a bonus project, and that project is going to be a drawstring bag. My name is Brenda Holtz. I am the owner and instructor for Kasha's Creation Sewing and Fashion Center. And if you are ready, let's get to work. The supplies that you will need for this class is, of course, your basic sewing supplies. You will need a half a yard of fabric, preferably 100% cotton, already pre-washed. You would also need your matching thread, a pencil, a ruler, and pattern paper. Okay, so before we get into our bonus project, I want to kind of show you what the supplies look like and our finished project as well before we get started. So for this class, the supplies that you're going to need, of course, is your fabric. You're going to need about a half a yard of 100% cotton fabric. It's the easiest to work with at this point in time. And I'm going to be doing 2 colors. I'm going to do my bag in this color, and then I'm going to do my ties in this color. So let's bring up our fabric. Now I'm going to use the black for my drawstrings, and I'm going to use this for my bag. So I have a half a yard of fabric, and I'm going to use this fold here. So I'm going to just pin it here. And because it's on the fold, you don't really have to find the grain lines. You can check it out. Always coming from the fold to make sure that this is lined up. So I'm going to start at the fold first. Pin a few pins just to get it stabilized, and then you're going to smooth your pattern out. Make sure it doesn't pucker. And if you can remember how we pin our pattern down, you push down, lift up the pin, the tip end of the pin, and then you push it through. Because you don't want to go like this and grab your pattern to pin it, because you're moving your fabric. Once you get your fabric flat, you don't want to move it any further than where it's been laid out, because sometimes it can get twisted and then you don't get a really good cut, depending on your fabric type too. So I'm going to just pin this all the way around, and then I'm going to go ahead and cut it out. And then I'm going to lay this out too, so I can cut it out at the same time. I can do all my cutting at one time. I'll move this right over here because it's already pinned on, so now I can move it. But while you're pinning it, you should never move it. So I had a piece of black that I'm going to be using for my straps, and I want to cut both of them out at the same time. So I'm going to fold this in half this way, and then I'm going to fold it this way. And then I'll get 2. So I folded my fabric twice, the long way and then the short way. So I'm going to take my pattern piece and lay it right on the fold. This part right here that says fold line, I'm going to put it right on this fold line here. Not this fold line here, because there's got a couple of fold lines going on. So I want to go ahead and pin it on this one, because this will allow me to do at least 2. Go ahead and always pin your fold line first. And my drawstring is going to go right up to the edge of my little fabric, and maybe even a little bit shorter, but I don't think it's going to matter a whole lot. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and cut this out, and I'm going to use my rotary cutter. I can show you again how to cut this with the scissors, but cutting it with the rotary cutter is always a lot faster. So when you're cutting, you're going to hold with one hand, cut with the other hand. So the hand you're cutting with, you're going to hold it down with your opposite hand. And when you're cutting, you're going to cut with long strides. Lift your scissors up, never cutting to the end of your scissors. Lift up, slide your scissors forward, and cut. Never to the end, slide and cut. And you can get an even cut without a lot of zigzags and so I'm going to go ahead and cut the other sides with the rotary cutter because it's just so much faster. And there we have it. So we've got that cut out. And the only notch that you need to put in on this one is the one at the top. So when we mark our pattern, you want to put a little clip right in that little point. So got my straps. Now I'm going to go ahead and cut out my bag. And I'm going to do it with the rotary cutter because it's faster. And I'm going to stand up. You may not be able to see me, but I'm going to stand up and do this. And one more side. Okay, so now we got everything cut out. I am going to go ahead and clip my match points, and then I can take my pattern off. Make sure you get your match points in there first before you take your pattern off. Okay, I want to show you this before I take my pattern off because remember we had to clip this side all the way up to the seam allowance here because that's going to fold all the way back to here and all the way back to here. So you need to go ahead and clip those while you have your pattern on there. The rest of them just get a small little clip. And you can see that from the back side. Okay, so I can go ahead and take my pattern off. And keep your pattern handy because all of your instructions are pretty much on the pattern itself. So I'm going to take these off. And then we're going to go to the ironing board because you're going to have to do some pressing first. Okay. So the first fold line on this, you're going to have to fold it down. But I think what I'm going to do is mark it. I think that's probably the easiest. That way you can see where I'm going to be going with this. I'm going to go ahead and draw them in with my wax chalk. And remember, when you start to press, this is the line you're going to fold it down on. So I'm going down another 1.25 inches. Inch and a quarter, and then 1 inch. And those are the instructions here on your pattern. So down here, 2 3/4. This one's 1.25 inches, and then this one is 1 inch. Okay, so I got this one marked. I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. And the other one, the next one down, 1.25 inches and 1 inch. Okay. But before we sew anything, I want you to take the little slits, open that up, and we're going to fold them back. And pin them because you're going to stitch those in first. That's going to be your opening for your drawstrings. So I'm going to pin these first, and then I'll bring my sewing machine up, and then we'll sew those together, and we can move on from there. So I'm going to go ahead and pin these. And you're pinning it, you're folding it to the wrong side of the fabric. So make sure you don't fold it to the right side. But this is how it's pinned. I have a pin at each one of them, and it's a very, very short stitch. So you're also going to have to do a back stitch, a small back stitch. So you see where I folded that back in the top on this side and also on this side. So let me bring my sewing machine up, and then we'll go ahead. Okay, so I got my sewing machine set up, and I'm going to go ahead and sew those little edges down, the little narrow hem. And remember, you're going to have to do just a little back stitch. Right on the edge of the fold. You're going to fold it up 1/4 inch and then fold it again 1/4 inch. And stitch it down, just a little back stitch. And you're going to do both sides. And stitch it from the wrong side of the fabric. That way you can see what you're sewing and you can get that little edge stitched down without missing it. Because if you stitch it from the right side, you might miss it because you can't see it. And one more. So I got all of these stitched. And don't forget to put your markings on there. And if you have the wax chalk, when you start to iron and press, it will erase some of your lines. So be cognizant of that, you know, some of your lines will be erased, but try to use maybe like the tip of your iron so you don't erase too much of your lines. So you'll have a guide once we sew this up, because we're going to sew it up and then we're going to press in the folds. So I'm going to trim this up. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and mark 1/4 inch too. And I'm going to press it down 1/4 inch. And then I am going to sew it down. Okay, so I put my line across here because you got to turn this under 1/4 of an inch. So I'm going to go ahead and press this under and then stitch it, and then we can go from there. So let me just stitch this, press this across. And the line that you made, if you use the wax chalk, it will erase, and you can use it as a guide for your pressing. Okay, so I'm going to stitch this across, or at least press it across. And I think before I do that, I'm going to go ahead and stitch up the sides. That way I can have a continuous stitching around the top part of my bag. So I'm going to go ahead and stitch it together, pin it and stitch. You see how these little parts match up? You're going to sew in a 1/2 inch seam allowance. And open that seam up so you'll be able to stitch that in rather than stitching across the fold. We want to be able to make it a continuous sewing loop as you begin to sew the top part of that drawstring bag. Okay, so now when you sew this, let me do a couple more pins here. So when you sew this, you're going to stitch from the top. You see where I pressed that fold at the top? At the top here where you're going to stitch that down. I opened that up. I opened it up. So I'm going to stitch from here to here. I'm going to back stitch at the top. I'm going to back stitch here, right here in that little corner right there, because it should match up evenly a 1/2 inch from the edge. So I'm going to stitch this, back stitch, and then I'm going to back stitch here and stitch it all the way to the bottom. So let me go ahead and stitch that in. So I'm going to set my seam guide at a 1/2 inch. So all the way down. That little opening. And rather than cutting that thread, I'm going to just slide it forward right into that little corner and start sewing it in. I'm going to go ahead and stitch the other side, and then we'll come back and get the top sewn and start getting those drawstring channels or casings in there. Okay, so I stitched up my side seams and I pressed them open, and then I serged them together. So you do need to make your seams pressed. You need to press them out before you serge them together, because you can serge them together, you can serge them open, it's up to you. But I figured, one swoop and I'm done. So make sure you press them open first, then you can serge them, but you're only going to serge up to here, because all of this is going to get folded down. This is all going to be folded down, so you don't have to actually serge that part, but we may need to stitch that down, or you can use stitch witchery to glue it down, whichever one you prefer. If you don't have the stitch witchery, just sew a basting stitch, no back stitching, just the width of the casing itself. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead on both sides. Remember, you press that seam open. This one you pressed open too, but you serged it. But we're going to go ahead and stitch this around so we can finish the top edge of our drawstring bag. So I'm going to bring up my sewing machine and I'm just going to do a small narrow hem on the edge. You can use your free arm and go round and round because now you're sewing in a circle. So start at your seam. It doesn't matter which one. Just start at your seam and you're gonna start stitching and then you back stitch when you get around to the other side. And if you have a serger, you can always serge this edge too as well. Okay, so I'm going to turn this to the right side. And because my chalk lines are erasable, I'm going to have to draw those back in. So I'm going to turn my corners. You can use your finger or you can use the point of your scissors or you can use your point turner. This is my point turner. So whenever you have little corners you need to pull out, you can use this to pull your corners out. See how nice and sharp those corners are. Okay, so I got my corners turned. And what I need to do probably is to draw my lines back in because they did get kind of pressed out. So I have an inch from here is where my casing is going to be right here. But I need to draw it up because there's also an edge where you have the ruffling. This is the one that has disappeared. So I'm going to draw that one back in. And then I'm going to press it down, my fold line. And then I'm going to stitch it. And stitch in your stitching lines. And if you check your pattern, you'll see where your stitching lines are. I'm just kind of redrawing over my lines so I can see how to press them because we're going to take this to the ironing board and we're going to press it. Okay, so this top line is going to fold down. We're going to fold it down on that top line here. And this is how we're going to press it. So that first top line, and I'll show you that on the pattern. This is your fold line here. This is that top line here that we're folding down like this. And it should cover your stitching lines. Okay, so I'm going to bring up my ironing board and just kind of press that, I'm sorry. So I'm going to press this down, covering, and make sure you just use the point of your iron to make that crease in the fold line because you'll have to draw your lines back in again. So if you erase them, it's no problem with doing that. If you have to, just go ahead and press and draw it back in there. So just use the point of your iron just to get just a crease in that edge. Okay, so I got my top edge pressed down, and it should go over the two stitching lines that you had here. So I'm going to go ahead and pin these together. But before I do that, remember you have this seam that is open. So you can go ahead and stitch a basting stitch in there to hold it down. So now you know exactly how much you need to stitch down. So all the way down, you're going to stitch that so it doesn't get caught up when you start putting your drawstring in. I'm going to put my free arm back on. I'm just going to do a little stitching and try to stitch it as close to the edge of the seam as possible. And these can come out. Once you get your drawstrings in there, you can always take these out. And so your stitching will look like this. And these stitches can come out, so make sure you don't backstitch. And so when you turn them over and you start putting those drawstrings in, it doesn't get caught up into the seam. So I'm going to go ahead and do the other side as well. Okay, so I got all my threads kind of clipped off. And I'm going to fold that down and I'm going to pin it. So on that little crease line we pressed in there, I'm going to go ahead and pin this. And because you're going to be stitching this from the right side of your bag, but make sure the underside, this side here, goes beyond your line on this side. And you can feel it with your hand. So my stitching line is here, but the end of my fabric on the inside is just below that line. So it should go below that line so you can get it caught up. Otherwise, your drawstrings are not going to be caught up into your stitching. Your casing will not be closed. Okay, so I'm going to do my free arm again. And you're just going to stitch on the lines. You got two stitching lines that form your casing for your drawstrings. So you're going to stitch around starting at one of the side seams, and I'm going to switch my stitching back to standard because I did have it on a basting stitch. So I'm going to switch it back to standard, and I'm just going to stitch it right on the line to form my casing. And when you get around to the other side, you're going to backstitch. Connect your stitches. So I got the top one done. I'm going to go ahead and stitch in the bottom part of your casing. Okay, so I have pretty much my drawstring bag done. We're going to go ahead and do the strings. I'm going to give this a little press, and then we're going to go ahead and press our drawstrings as well because they have to be pressed before we can sew them, and that's an easy fix. So I'm going to press all of my lines out now that I've got everything. Okay, so now I got my bag done. Let's go ahead and press strings, drawstrings. So when you're pressing, I'm gonna lay this over to the side for now, but when you're pressing in your drawstrings, you're gonna fold them in half first. That's the easiest way to do it. Just fold it in half, unless you have one of those binder equipments that will fold everything in at the same time. But I have one, but for me, it's easier for me to do it this way. So fold it in half. And then you're going to take this end here, fold it down just a little bit, and then turn it under. So we're just going to give it a little press, maybe turn it about 1/4 of an inch on that edge here. And then we're going to fold them in the middle. So each edge is going to fold in the middle. Fold those edges right to the middle and press like this all the way down. And then when you get it pressed, you're going to fold it like this. And then that's how we're going to be stitching it. So I'm going to go ahead and finish these up, and then I'll come back and show you how to stitch it. But in the meantime, get those drawstrings pressed and ready to sew. Okay, so once I get it folded to the center, see how I folded both edges to the center. I turned under the edge here. I'm going to fold it back and put these two ends together and then press them. So you're just going to press it because this is how it's going to be sewn together. I know in our lecture and demo time in our previous classes, we also did drawstrings that were pulled from the inside out. But I think these are probably way too long to do that and would take up a lot of time. So I think this is the fastest way to do it. To turn it inside, press it, and then stitch it along the folded edges. And be sure you don't burn yourself because the iron does get hot that close to your fingers. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and stitch these two together. And sometimes when you start with the little edge here, and you have to do a folded edge on both ends because they're going to be both exposed. So you're going to have to finish both ends. And I did press it in, but by the time I get to the end, I'm going to turn it under. But I'm going to start here at this end. And what I'm going to do is start at the folded edge and then work my way back, because sometimes it's hard getting it started. You can use this little lifter too, because sometimes you can't get the traction going on with the feed dogs when you have something that is a little thicker. So I'm going to start backwards first, and then I'm going to move forward. You know, roll my needle down because it is really hard to go forward. So just kind of stick it in there, and then that'll get you to the edge. And then you can take it out, turn it around, do a pivot, and then you're going to go. And sometimes I can hold on to this thread and help it to get going a little bit too. See how holding on to that really does help. You don't have to sew the whole thing at one time. Just stop, because sometimes you do have to make some adjustments. And I'm coming to the end, so I'm just going to tuck that in, because you're going to have to do the same thing on this end too. You may not be able to sew it across. So what you're going to do, I'm pinning it like this. You probably don't see it, but I'll show it to you on the other one. Just go ahead and finish stitching all the way out to the end. Now, in terms of sewing straight on these, I use the guide points on my foot. Okay, so I'm going to roll my needle down, turn it this way, do one more stitch. Then I'm going to turn it this way. And if you can do a little back stitch, that's good. So no problem with that on this end. But I'm going to have to start it, sometimes it's a little bit more difficult to do. So there's that one. You got one done. We're going to do the other one. I'm going to pin this in together. And actually, I'm going to start with the end that's open. Maybe I'll start at the other end, because it seems to want to kick out a little bit, and I can see it a little bit better once I get to the end. So I'm going to roll my needle down, and sometimes you can walk this through too, because it's a little bit thicker. And sometimes your machine doesn't want to always sew it, but you can walk it through, or do the back stitch. That's another way of doing it. But you want to hold on to those threads too. Get it moving. Find the guide points on your foot and just focus on that point. Don't worry so much about what the needle is doing. Just focus on that area and guiding it into that area of your foot. So coming down to the end, so I'm going to turn that little part in and stitch it. Pivot and turn and back. That way your little ties don't come loose. So trim everything up. Get rid of all your little threads. And then we're going to go ahead and thread these through our casing in our drawstring bag. But before I do, I think I just want to give it a little press. Pressing is always makes things much nicer. So get all my strings off, and then I'm going to press them. And I always check to see too, in parts of your strappings, your drawstrings, if you missed any of the folds and you end up with a little gap in your drawstring. So make sure you don't have any gaps in your drawstring. So I'm going to take a safety pin on one side. And I'm going to take my bag and I'm going to thread this way from this side all the way around and back out this way. And because we sewed those little stitches down, that should help us to thread it a lot easier. So I'm going to go this way from this side. And you just push your pin, the head of your pin forward, and then pull the fabric all the way around. Okay, so I'm almost up to the other side, and I'm going to come out that hole, and I'm going to kind of even those up a little bit. I'm going to have to take another safety pin to kind of hold it so it doesn't go back into my casing. So I'm going to put a safety pin because these are going to get tied together. Okay, so now I threaded it from this side. Let me just kind of even it up a little bit. You want to even it up here on this side. So now I went through this side. Now I'm going to go through this side. So I take my safety pin and I'm going to thread it through the other side. So I'm going to go in. So you got two casings in there, but that's okay. And just pull the fabric until you get it threaded all the way around. And then you're just going to continue to the other side. Don't worry about this because it's supposed to go that way, but we're going to go right on to the other side because once you get to this little part where it's open, you just continue over to the other side because we got to get back to where we started. Okay, so now that we're back where we started, got a lot of strings going on here. So you want to even everything out. Then you're going to tie your little knots in your drawstrings. But you got to kind of even everything out first. Okay. Okay, so my safety pin in is here, so I'm just going to pull this one this way, and this one to even it out, I'm just going to pull it this way. And when you get them even, then you can tie them off. Everything's nice and even. And I'm going to take my safety pins out, and then I'm going to tie some little knots in there. Just tie it a couple of times. And if you like, you could also stitch them. I just like to tie them. And you just want to make a little knot. You don't want to make it too big. About like that. See that knot in there? Just about like that. So I got my ends, but you got to pull it really tight to make sure that it doesn't come undone. And then I'm going to do the other side too. Just a small knot. Becoming a little tricky. There we go. It's coming now. Okay. So get it through and then tighten your knot. Okay. So even it up again, and then you just draw it in, and that is your drawstring bag. One other thing you need to do before you finish completely is to take out those little basting stitches that you held your seams down with. So I'm going to take one of my little ripping tools and just take those out because I no longer need those anymore. And if they make a little loop, because now those little strings are in the inside, this is the loop from the threads from the inside. If they make loops, pull them out like that. There's a couple of loops here. And I'm going to pull that out. See how I'm pulling that out? Those are your basting threads from the inside, because you do have threads on the top side and also on the bottom side. So I'm going to pull those out from the top side. And as you pull them, it does pull the little loop up from the inside. So I can pull this one up, the one that's hiding on the inside, that's your bobbin thread. And this one here, see that little loop right there? Right there. Now you can pull that whole thing out. Okay, so there you have it. You can give it a final press, get all your strings off, and there you have your drawstring bag. Okay, so we finished our bonus project for today, and I want to leave a little sewing tip of today. Now, for your sewing journey, it's always a good practice to finish your projects before you start a new one. Because 9 times out of 10, if you don't finish it, it will end up being stored somewhere in a closet or in a bag. So it's a good practice, and get it in your mind. I'm not going to start another project until I finish this, or get rid of it. If it's not working for you, then you can get rid of it, or do something else, repurpose it or something. But always try to finish your projects, because you will end up with a lot of unfinished projects. Now, if you persevered through the previous class, you did good. You learned how to put in elastic. You also learned how to make casings. You also learn how to do drawstrings, and there's 2 ways to do that too. So you learn how to sew on the curved and in the round. So these are some of the techniques that you're going to be used as you continue on your sewing journey. So this is the last class in series beginner 2, course number 2. And if you are ready to move on forward into the next class, we will see you there. You are so amazing.